Welcome to Data Myths Podcast with your hosts, Brian and Malinda Gagnon.
So, a little about us. I'm interested in how tech helps us improve our lives. I have 20 years experience in digital communications. I'm an ex-Googler and now help launch new companies and products.
And I've spent 20 plus years evangelizing tech at some of the world's largest companies. Whether you're a dataphile or a dataphobe, we have something for you on this podcast. So get ready. Let's go. Well, we've made it to podcast 5. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, I know. I think is 5 a special threshold? I think for us it is.
Yeah. Let's go with it. So what do you want to talk about today?
I think it would be great to talk about some interesting news in the press over the past week. So if anyone is interested in tech and following the news, I'm sure you've seen the little showdown between Apple and Facebook over Facebook's research app.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting. It made me want to delete my Facebook account again.
Right. Well, I wonder how many people are actually thinking about that. And I mean, certainly, this isn't the first time that Apple has had an issue with what Facebook is putting on iOS and in the Apple Store. So the tolerance, I would say, is pretty lean at this point.
So this is an interesting topic. So we're going to cover really Facebook, privacy in general of these big social companies, as well as Google, whatever you want to call them. And where does this take us today? So we'll talk a little bit about the tech. Obviously, we're going to talk about the ethics of this. And I also think we really need to dig into sort of the tipping point of when people lose faith. So let's start with the tech a little bit. I know you had some questions and thoughts on this.
Yeah, let's kind of set the table for what this is and what's been going down the last week. So essentially, TechCrunch did an investigation into apps and how they're abiding by or not certain privacy guidelines. And basically, when TechCrunch approached Facebook about this research app, not much was done. Then Apple actually revoked their enterprise certificate that allowed them to distribute this research app. And that caused, of course, the app not being able to be served anymore, but it also actually shut down all of Facebook's internal apps that their employees used.
I mean, that's pretty major.
Yeah, it's extremely major to think about how that affected their productivity for a couple of days. So to say that what they were doing with this app wasn't something that was absolutely going against their policy, I mean, it's clear that it was. There's no question about that.
So what exactly were they doing? And I saw now that Apple has already reversed and allowed their enterprise program or their enterprise apps back in the program. Is that Apple giving up or?
No, they basically just said you can still use it for your internal employees, but you still can't use the enterprise program to distribute the research app. The research app is not allowed.
So what was the research app researching?
So basically, this was a program that was helping Facebook do market research. So they have a way of monitoring users' activity across everything they're doing on their mobile phone through iOS. This was something that people could opt into and that chose to be a part of that program. So absolutely, we'll give it that. But it was positioned in a way that they would have a VPN and they would be paid $20 a month in exchange for using this. And there are also referral bonuses as well. It also recruited people for ages 13 to 35 years old. And that also brings in an element to this picture of, there were about 5% of these users who were teenagers.
Is that even legal? in the United States that you can get in a contract with a 13-year-old? It seems off to me.
Yeah, typically teenagers have to have parental consent.
Interesting. Yeah. So seems like they were definitely going around the barn on that one for sure. Now,
So this is something that I want to ask you about, being the technologist in the room, when they describe what Facebook did with this app. So Facebook, to sum it up, would pull in all the users' web browsing activity, the apps that are on their phone, how they use them. They would even be able to decrypt encrypted traffic as well. And the way TechCrunch has described this is they're using a VPN, so virtual private network, to gain, quote, root network access to their phone. So can you explain to us what this actually means?
well, first of all, I don't know what the person at TechCrunch is talking about. So there's a couple things. So VPN, I know there's data files and there's data phobes that follow us, right? So let's break it down. So really all that a VPN is if you have your home network or you're sitting in a Starbucks or one of your other favorite purveyors of delicious beverages, and you want to communicate with a network far off, whether it be your corporate network for work or somewhere else. It is possible to create an encrypted tunnel, so to speak, from your device to that far off network. That tunnel, so to speak, fully encrypted, is a VPN. It's its own network that rides over the general internet and makes sure that it's nice and secure. So that's what they're talking about in that TechCrunch article. Now, network root access, to me, that sounds like somebody that maybe is just making things up a little bit. So root access is really getting the highest level of access in the Linux or Unix operating system, which many of Apple's devices and operating systems are built on that, right? It's been around a very long time. And so root access gives you access to basically everything. That's the highest level of permissions.
Okay. So when someone would download this app, opt into this program, they were transferring their data via VPN to a Facebook server, and Facebook could then see anything that was happening on that phone.
I guess in principle, right? But let's talk a little bit deeper, right? So the Apple iOS, right? They've really built it from the ground up to be fairly secure. So on the hardware level, they have built system on chip. They have built a boot ROM, which is non-writable, that gets read at startup, read only, that has a certificate in it. So they've done a number of things at the hardware level to really make sure that their operating system on this phone or this device is really robust and secure. And then on top of that, they have some software layer as well. So every application on your phone typically has its own little box that it sits in, right? So it's in a data protection box, so to speak, so that it can't see other encrypted data. So whatever they're doing there definitely breaks what Apple had in mind for securing the platform.
And Apple has published extensive documentation around their data governance and how iOS is actually built. So we'll throw this in show notes. You can dig into it and check it out. But this is something that clearly Apple takes very seriously. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that from my days at VMware, this was something that was near and dear to our heart. It clearly in their architecture looks like they've built in many, many safeguard layers to, keep things separate, right?
Yeah.
So that it doesn't intermingle.
And Apple provided a statement around this to talk about what Facebook was doing. And I'll just read a little bit of it because I think it's crystal clear what's going on. So these are Apple's words. We designed our enterprise developer platform solely for the internal distribution of apps within an organization. Facebook has been using their membership to distribute a data collecting app to consumers, which is a clear breach of their agreement with Apple. So there it is. I mean, it's just not supposed to be used that way.
That's seems pretty crystal clear to me.
And they went on to say, hey, if anyone is doing this, they're going to have their certificates revoked, which we also did in this case to protect users and their data. Case closed.
So I'm not an Apple fanboy by any stretch. There are plenty of those out there. In fact, I got rid of my Apple Watch because the battery life stunk. And I guess that just didn't work for me.
I love my Apple Watch.
Yeah, I know you do.
Side note.
I know. So anyhow, well, you got to back up because mine's just sitting there waiting. I went back old school. So with that being said, so Google's platform, Android, it's a lot more open. It's a lot more willy-nilly in terms of, app security and such. Are we seeing anything like that on Apple's side? I mean, what's Facebook doing over there? I can only wonder.
So yes, I'm with you all the way that this highly regulated platform that Apple runs has advantages and disadvantages. Same goes with Android. So while we have this strong data privacy and protection on iOS, on Android, it's a different story. So this research app is still available in the Google Play Store. You can still use it on Android.
Oh, goody. I can't wait. So Google also had an app that was similar to this, right? And it seems like they took that down as well. Is that correct?
Yes. So Google also had an app that did something similar to Facebook research app. And this was also distributed through Apple's enterprise program. Now, the real big difference, well, I would say there are two main differences on why we heard so much about Facebook and not so much about Google, is one, that Google does a better job of, on the face of it, disclosing what they're doing and why they're doing it. And secondly, when they were approached by Apple and said, hey, stop doing it, they quickly stopped. And their PR folks were very quick to respond. PR 101, get out ahead of it. So let's talk about what that was. So Google has an app called ScreenWise Meter. And that's part of their market research program that they also run. It's similar to Facebook, where they want to understand what people are doing online, right? So this is part of Google's program that is called Google's Cross Media Panel, and they also have a Google Opinion Rewards program. So it's something that people opt into. There's an explainer video. There's information when you opt in to say, hey, this is market research. This is why we do it, to make your products better, and we want to monitor your information. Do you want to opt in?
So do we have to just be a lot more careful? I know every time I install something from Google or Facebook or really anybody, there's always a box that says, hey, do you want to anonymize your data and blah, 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 blah. Insert legalese here. Am I signing my life away when I do that? Or is this a specific separate app that I would have to go searching for?
Oh, this is a separate app. This ScreenWise Meter app from Google, you're opting in to participate in Google market research.
So why would I want to do that? I mean, I would rather sell my kidney, I think, on eBay.
You get rewards.
Oh,
so
nice.
yeah,
Sweet.
yeah. So the thing is, this the way Google handled this is, when they were distributing the app via the enterprise program. So that in and of itself, you can't do, right? It's almost like doesn't matter what you're doing. You just can't use the enterprise program to distribute consumer apps, right? So almost like forget all the other stuff. it just can't do that.
So let's talk a little bit about the differences, right? So, I know we've talked a lot about Apple, but part of the infrastructure difference between the two is that Apple really tightly controls their hardware. So they don't have to create an operating system for the phone that is across many different platforms. And then you have, Android, which that is over so many different devices at this point. One could argue that the Google phones, the Pixel phones, are going to have a lot tighter integration with the operating system on there, but they still have to keep that fairly loose and open because they've got a ton of other partners that are using Android as an operating system. So that's part of the challenge and what Google's faced here. So does this mean that enterprises that want to sort of skirt some of these rules naturally start going over to the Android platform?
Well, everybody has their own rules, and I think this is why we're seeing GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, in the EU, and we saw legislation passed in California this last summer because the rules are different. Apple has their set of data and privacy rules, and Google has their set of rules for Android, and there's no set rule book that everybody's playing by in the US.
So that's interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about GDPR and how that actually plays into some of the stuff that we've got going on? I mean, is this going to cause huge problems for Facebook with some of these things that they're doing?
Well, any company that operates in the EU or touches EU consumer data has already had to comply with GDPR. So that was implemented in May of 2018. And to say a lot of work had to be done to get there is an understatement, but they had 2 years to do it. So that's happening right now. And the law that was passed in California, the California Consumer Privacy Act, that was passed in June of last year. And again, there are 2 years before it's implemented. And it has a lot of some similarities. It's certainly not as far-reaching as GDPR. But essentially, some of the big points made by GDPR is, one, there are significant fines that can be incurred. So up to 20 million euros or up to 4% of annual global turnover. So those are serious fines if you're in violation. But some of the big things here are, your right to be notified if there's a breach within 72 hours, right to access your own data, the right to be forgotten, so to have your data erased.
But it sounds like they created, reward bucks or cash and basically said, hey, give us all your data.
Right. And under our laws in the US, there's nothing wrong with that.
So under GDPR, technically, if you give people access, that works as well too. So if somebody consents to this,
if you go about it in the right way, if you have it clearly laid out, the information you're going to access and why it will be accessed, and then abide by all these other measures, that also could be fine. But you have to do it in the right way. Another couple of interesting points with GDPR is, one is data portability. So if let's say I'm the tech company, Brian says, you say, okay, I want all of my personal data. I have to give that to you in a way that can be read by a machine, right? And you then have that right to take it to any other company and give that to them because it's your data.
So what about if I just want to wipe out all of my data?
That would be fine. You have the right to have them delete it.
Okay.
And there's also this principle that is called privacy by design. So it's actually meant for when you design a technology, design a system, that data protection is part of it from the inception. It's not just like an add-on. So it's just how you operate.
That makes sense. So
Yeah.
security by design, that's another
Yeah.
principle, right? Where you start with security and then build your app around that. And it seems like these big companies have been kind of lazy, right? And I think when you really boil down to it, there haven't been, Marriott said, "Oh, hey, we lost 1 billion users' data, including passport info and all of that." And I've spoken to a few people at Marriott, and they've actually just said, "Well, that was because Sheridan or Starwoods wasn't doing a good job, and we didn't know it." So
Yeah.
that's not an excuse.
Well, and a lot of times when people are, developing apps, it's been a little bit more of the mentality of, well, hey, what can we get our hands on? And this is a very different approach that it's actually, no, what do we need to get the job done, rather than just, having a really broad net and pulling it all into the boat. And that's something, that is like data minimization, if you will. So it's only limiting yourself to collecting the information that you actually need.
Well, and I think right now, with every company that has AI or machine learning behind their name, companies are quickly learning that the amount of data that you need to be able to make, authentic and accurate artificial intelligence really involves quite a bit of data. So data is getting increasingly hard to gather. So I think that first of all, there's a big data grab going on where people are trying to just get as much data as they can as quickly as possible before the spigot shuts off. And the second piece is, trying to, nefariously get and grow your data that you might not actually ever be able to touch anyway, right? So going out and doing some of these sneaky tricks to try to get a huge data set so that you look bigger than you are and that your model is more accurate. So it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in terms of looking at a little bit more of Facebook's history, it's really interesting too to roll the clock back to last summer when they had a similar app called Anavo, and that was on the Apple Store, and that was shut down back in like August of last year. And then we see the Facebook research app living, through the enterprise program. So, I think that's also why we saw such a swift reaction and a kind of a harsh reaction from Apple, because it's almost like, hey, we just talked about this,
But if you if you go to Anavo's website, right, it doesn't say very much. But if you read this, I mean, you would think that they were hiding a spare key to your house under the mat extra well, right? And I mean, they talk about.
So how do they tee it up on the website?
Oh, I mean, it's kind of entertaining actually. They basically say, helping protect your data, your mobile data, and letting you save it and measure it. I don't ever care about saving or measuring my data, I can assure you. Outside of, business and helping businesses do that, I personally, I'm not thinking, hey, I want to measure my data. I want to see how I measure up compared to other people.
Well, you can download Anavo on the Google Play Store, so you too can protect and measure your mobile data if you want. But, what this does, it's the same thing essentially that the Facebook research app was doing. So it basically, allowed Facebook to see all sorts of activity on the mobile device. And it collected information about other apps installed. And what this essentially helped Facebook do is, that market research, meaning understand different usage habits, understanding what people are downloading, and it actually kind of helped them get a lead on some brand new tech trends. And there's some articles in the press about how they kind of got the inside scoop on this group FaceTime application, essentially. So you may have seen this app called a House Party. So
I did not.
that
I feel left out in the cold when it comes to social apps.
it's very popular in the 13 plus teen group. So you can it's essentially FaceTime, but with multiple people, like in one room.
Okay, that makes
You can
sense.
see
Why
everybody's
I didn't see
faces,
it.
and you can pass notes, and I can send you a little private message, and that it's fun. So, but Facebook, via some of this research, found this was super popular. They launched something called Bonfire, and market research is something every company does, of course. But I think the ethical question here is, when you have these huge companies like Facebook, like Google, with access to so much user information, when does it come to the point where they just have a truly unfair advantage with getting insight into the marketplace? And when does that start to crowd out innovation and new companies from emerging? And in this case, House Party's still going strong, and Bonfire is only in a few countries. But
Well, I mean, this happened with WhatsApp too, right? So
exactly.
Facebook went out and did a bunch of, data research, not ethically, once again, on WhatsApp, and they got caught and busted in Europe, right? So
And of course, they acquired WhatsApp. So, but yeah, it's all part of that bigger picture.
So let's talk more about it. I mean, I see there's definitely patterns here, right? And it's interesting that in the news, they now really associate whenever Facebook, and I don't know if they masterfully did this or not, or if this is just the press liking to lump big things together. I have almost always seen in recent articles that Facebook is followed very closely by Google. And I feel like these two companies are operating with a pretty different credo at the depths of their companies, right? And Facebook kind of seems like they don't really care. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg has missed 40 different inquiries from different governments, and they haven't answered a ton of questions. They seem to be thumbing their nose at just about everybody. Google seems to be stepping up and trying to fix things.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're perfect either, but
No, yeah, they're not, but there is a clear difference in how they operate. So, I mean, with this particular example that we're talking about in the last week, so Google's app, and they had to take it down just like Facebook did. However, Google was much more upfront about how its research data collection program actually worked. What's collected, what's involved. They actually also gave their users who opt into this program a guest mode feature, so they could not have their information monitored, or if someone younger than 13 was using a device. And also, just as a matter of, addressing when a problem arises, Google issued a very clear apology. They said, oh, our app should not have operated under Apple's Developer Enterprise Program. It was a mistake, and we apologize. They literally said those words. And it took them 4 hours to respond. Versus Facebook, when they issued their statement, they just said they took down the app. They did not say that they were required by Apple to take down the app. It took them 7 hours to respond. It's just not being upfront. Like, when you're caught doing something wrong, own it, fix it, move on. They just aren't upfront, and they weren't upfront with what the app was actually doing.
Well, and I kind of wonder, we've talked about this in the past. I think that this probably comes down to legal precedent, right? And that nobody has been sued out of business at this point for a data breach. I mean, we keep seeing them. They keep getting bigger. I don't think anybody has been sued enough at this point, or had a big enough class action lawsuit that has either hurt them and threatened their very existence or given someone else a competitive advantage. And when you look at it, this has been such a, the tech industry has had such a consolidating effect over the last 10 or 15 years that there's a lot of duopolies, whether it be Intel and AMD, that's kind of one of the early races, Western Digital and SanDisk and Micron and Seagate, that's all kind of consolidated for the most part. And even Dell and HP and Amazon and Microsoft and Google. And then you go all the way to the Office platforms, right? So Microsoft Office and, Google products. I don't think there's a lot of innovation going on in those spaces because these guys own it, right? And each and every one of those have a pretty big foothold. And, it's kind of a two vendor choice for most of these major decision points.
And that is what the EU is really starting to work toward, to really examine where a monopoly, where duopolies are happening, and to basically bring suit. So, that in terms of consumers having rights to sue on data breaches, that's something that this California Consumer Privacy Act would help to advance should it become implemented in the way it intends. I mean, there are 2 years between now and then. A lot can happen to change it, but that would give consumers legs to stand on, essentially, in that case.
Well, I mean, I look at this as the Ford and Firestone tire fiasco, right? Where they sort of backed into a number that they think that they could comfortably get sued for and decide that, hey, let's just throw caution to the wind because it's more expensive, or, our whole business model is riding on, really digging into people's data in this way because that's priceless. So, if we get sued for $1 billion or two, whatever, we'll just write that off at some point. We've seen this go on. I mean, look at the, not to completely shift gears, but look at VW, right? The VW Auto Group got sued for, I think they're into $31 billion at this point for their Dieselgate scandal. They're still one of the largest auto companies in the world. Sure, some people didn't get bonuses for a few years, but they're still in existence, and I'm guessing that probably gave them a leg up in some cases.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a question of how much does that hurt your business, and it seems that consumers are kind of shrugging off news of data breaches like, oh, well, it just happens. And it's remarkable that that's kind of the environment that, their sensitive information got exposed, and it's kind of, it's just the way it is now. What can we do about it? They feel powerless, right? When you have that kind of reaction.
I mean, I've talked to friends and family that have said, well, my data's not really that interesting. I'm just whatever. No one's going to care about me. When does that tipping point happen? Is it somebody goes to the bank and finds out all of their money's gone? Do they, is it that they find out that they basically are in foreclosure because some bank, their info got hacked and some numbers got changed? And, what is that tipping point in your opinion? Where does that happen?
I mean, it probably will have to be something serious like that before people pay attention to it. And we haven't seen on a large scale what actually happens to individuals when these breaches occur. And I want to make a distinction too that, market research data is not like in and of itself an activity that is invasive and wrong to do. This is panels have been happening forever. Surveys have been happening forever. It's about being clear with someone what they're being asked to do and share, and when they provide that information, what it's going to be used for. That's the real principle that we have, going on here.
So that's actually interesting to me because I've been a programmer and built apps and all of that. And it's insurmountable to create an app and be able to see what a user is doing, so that we can actually fix the product and make it better. Where does that line tip? Because there are things like, Hotjar or Glassbox or whatever, which that's in the news too. Where does that tipping point happen for that?
Sure. So distinction between market research. So that's something very broad reaching. It could be, in the case of Google's, cross media panel, that they're looking at a user's media patterns, their online content consumption patterns, right? So that's far sweeping. Now there's something else when we want to understand an app or website and improve user experience, improve the product, So the tools you mentioned, Glassbox, Hotjar, Full Story, these are all programs that allow you to actually see what a user is doing in almost real time on your app or on your website. So you can see, someone clicking through. You can see them entering information. The thing is, you don't know who that person is, and any personal information that's entered, emails, passwords, credit card, it is not viewable.
So why is Glassbox in the news so much right now?
So apparently Glassbox was used in the Facebook research app, and that some of that personal information, sensitive information, was not encrypted, was not masked.
Got it. That makes sense.
But, want to call that out, that these tools are extremely useful. It helps people improve their products. It helps people make better apps and better websites. So if they're done right, there's, that's a great tool. But of course, you have to protect people's information.
That seems logical to me.
So I think it's really easy to see, some of this stuff in the press of, Glassbox, and oh my gosh, are you kidding me? You can see someone clicking around a website. That could sound really scary, but when it's anonymized, it's just, what a company uses to make something better. So, I think we have to just be cognizant of what's an okay thing to do because it's useful information and it's used in a stand-up way versus, you're collecting this information and hiding the real use of it or collecting information you shouldn't have.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So where does that, I'm going to ask it a little bit different way. I know we've covered a few of the points, but where does the consumer tipping point happen? Where does, the 45-year-old person that logs on to Facebook, every day to see how their friends and family are doing, when does this affect them enough that they actually take action and come off of all of Facebook's different properties? I mean, it feels like the friction is still too much and people are just okay with these problems.
Well, I think it's a question of, what is the Facebook app doing? I mean, it's really, so far, people don't really see it as a problem of just using the Facebook app.
Is it because they don't understand?
Well, but you have to, the Facebook app is different than the Facebook research app. They're different. So the Facebook app is not monitoring everything you're doing online. I mean, it has a lot of information because people share a lot on Facebook. They know who all your friends and associates are. I mean, there's still obviously a ton of information there, but they're two different things. And I think that's important too, to distinguish.
But do people just draw the parallel at some point if the news and the media keep saying, hey, Facebook did another bad thing.
Yeah, I think they certainly have a PR problem right now. I mean, Zuckerberg doesn't seem like a real like stand-up guy
He
at the
looks like a
moment.
robot. I don't know if I've seen him smile yet. He might be a robot.
Well, you did get a chance to meet him at a party at CES, so I guess you'd know.
He was a robot. Yeah. Total robot. I wanted to spill
A
a
party
drink on him.
robot?
Yeah. So let's wrap this up. I think this has been really interesting. I'm sure that we'll have many more discussions about this. You know, does at some point Facebook start to come out with its own, hardware and to get out around Apple and Google? I don't know. But when you start to look at, we really have 2 or 3 major platforms that people seem to put their faith and trust in. Where does that go?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think if we see time after time, certain companies having ways of responding and certain ways of, explaining what they're doing, that consumers are going to start figuring it out, right? I mean, which companies they want to trust and which ones they may be suspect of. But it takes a while when technology is so enmeshed in what we do, how we communicate. It really is going to take a pretty extraordinary event, for example, for people to en masse just deactivate their Facebook accounts. And I want to give a quick shout out to a new tool from Google. There's a new free tool that lets you know if your login information is exposed. So if you're using Chrome, you can download Password Checkup.
Okay. What's that do for us?
It basically tells you, hey, your password information has been exposed. You need to go change your password. So Google helps take care of that on their own system. So in your own Google accounts, but this is for accounts that they don't run.
Okay. All right. That's interesting.
Handy
Good
tip.
Yeah. So from the perspective of people actually coming off of a platform, I would love your marketing background on this, right? It doesn't necessarily take everybody deleting their Facebook account to cause strife inside of Facebook. If people stop logging in and actively using it, and we already know, I think the numbers are going down in that people are putting into these platforms in terms of FaceTime on them. At what point, as a marketer, does the platform become less useful and therefore you spend less on it? Because that will dictate as well.
The user age has been getting older on Facebook, and they're having a hard time getting to that, 13 to 20-ish age group. And right now, that hasn't really affected their wallet. So ad spending is still strong. The user base that they have on the platform is a user base that has spending power. But if they can't tap into those young people, then that will be a problem in the future.
So what platform are young people? Where are they going? So if they're not going to Facebook, I'm sure they're trying to get away from their techno-hip parents, right? And get on to Instagram, Snapchat.
Yep. That house party app that I mentioned is huge. And the thing is, I mean, they actually, like, House Party doesn't even have an ad model. So it's really interesting to see that some different models are emerging, and we have to think about this very differently and how we're serving people and what we expect of them if we want to be useful and, of course, have a viable business in turn as we're serving people.
Well, I mean, to me, I see it as when things start to, start getting too cool, for instance, and people's parents start to get on a platform, that seems to be when the opening happens for a new platform. And it typically is because the platform isn't fully monetized either. So, YouTube is getting full of ads now. All of a sudden, a new platform comes up and now people are sharing their stuff somewhere else because they don't want to see a ton of ads.
Yeah. Well, in the case of House Party, they're actually adopting a gaming model. So they have a game called Heads Up, and it was featured on Ellen and got a bunch of buzz. But essentially, you can get a few games for free, and then you start getting charged. So that is something that, of course, is so different than ads. So you only pay if you like something and you want to continue enjoying it versus interrupting a user experience or cluttering a user experience with advertisements. And, I come from the ad world. I have a firm belief that there is a way to advertise that doesn't annoy, distract, disrupt. However, when you're especially on a mobile device, you just have a real estate problem. So that's something that's pretty difficult to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, let's put a bow on this thing and wrap it up. So what I would say is, based on what we've talked about, from a tech perspective, these companies are going to just find different places to go and to collect this data. They seem fairly brazen and mostly empowered to sort of do whatever they want. That might be a generalization, but that's sort of how it feels based on their actions. And I guess in closing, it doesn't sound like Facebook is really going anywhere anytime soon based on the fact that they keep, eroding people's trust. It doesn't seem like it's enough to cause a tipping point event. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it's a fair assessment at the moment. And it's this classic question that we've been, looking at for a long time of, when are tech companies going to step up to regulate themselves? And of course, that is happening now. It's not like this is a new idea and they're just starting to figure it out. But when will they get to the point where that is happening enough? So basically, consumers, government officials are satisfied, because if we keep seeing trends like what we saw in California with the California Consumer Privacy Act, that is something that, if that continues to have legs, it absolutely, in my opinion, will gain ground not only in other states, but probably at the federal level as well, because companies don't want to have different regulations in different states. I mean, think about just how that would be to operationalize. So it's going to happen one way or another. And right now, we're seeing both sides of the equation play out in the US.
That makes sense. So, all right. Well, this is that time. Let's close it out. Well, thank you very much for your time, Malinda, today. And as always, a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share. And if you have a question or an idea that would be great for us to include on the next episode, we would love to hear from you. Just send us an email at hello@datamyths.com. You can also send us a note on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook. And finally, want to give a big thanks to our sponsors, Infonomic Data and Uprise Partners. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next time.